The morning market was crowded, loud and utterly indifferent to the old woman being shoved aside, like she was nothing more than an inconvenience, until one girl's voice cut through the noise and changed everything. The late morning sun poured gold over the open-air market of Ridgeview Square, glinting off fruit stands and the polished shoes of busy shoppers. Nora Whitfield had come only to buy bread and a few vegetables for her landlady, clutching a thin cloth bag and counting coins in her palm as she walked. She was 22, dressed in a faded blue cardigan, her hair tied back in a simple knot, the kind of girl people overlooked in a crowd. But Nora noticed things other people didn't. She noticed the old woman standing near the flower stall, trembling, her woven basket spilled across the cobblestones, oranges rolling in every direction, while a red-faced vendor shouted at her, "You clumsy old fool, you'll pay for every one of those, do you hear me? Or I'll call someone to drag you out of here," the vendor barked, jabbing a finger toward her face. The old woman, who could not have been younger than 70, tried to kneel and gather the fruit, her hands shaking so badly that she could barely close her fingers. Around a single orange, people walked past her without slowing. A few even laughed under their breath, murmuring that she should have been more careful, that she looked like she didn't belong there, that her patched coat and worn shoes marked her as someone not worth their time. Nora felt something tighten in her chest, a heat rising up her throat that she couldn't ignore. She had grown up in a house where her mother always said that dignity was the one thing poverty could never touch unless you let it. So instead of walking past like everyone else, Nora knelt beside the old woman and began gathering the scattered oranges herself, placing them gently back into the basket. "There is no need to shout at her like that," Nora said, rising to face the vendor, her voice steady despite the way her heart pounded. "She didn't do this on purpose. Look at her hands, she can barely stand. Have some decency." The vendor sneered, waving a hand dismissively. "And who are you, her lawyer?" "Mind your business, girl, unless you want to pay for the damages yourself." Without hesitation, Nora reached into her cloth bag and pulled out the small handful of coins she had saved for her own groceries, pressing them into the vendor's palm. "There, now leave her alone." The vendor counted the coins, grumbled something under his breath, and finally turned away to serve another customer, muttering that some people had too much time on their hands. Nora turned to the old woman, whose eyes were glassy with unshed tears, and gently helped her to a nearby bench beneath the shade of an old oak tree. "Are you all right?" Nora asked softly, taking a handkerchief from her bag and pressing it into the woman's trembling hands. "You don't have to explain anything to me. Just breathe. You're safe now." The old woman looked at her for a long moment, as though trying to understand why a stranger would spend her last coins and her time on someone she owed nothing to. "Why did you do that?" she finally whispered. "Nobody else even looked at me." Nora smiled gently and sat beside her. "Because kindness shouldn't depend on how much someone has, or how they're dressed. My mother used to say that everyone deserves to be treated like they matter, especially on their hardest days. If this story about kindness and quiet courage is moving something in your heart, take a moment to like this video, drop a comment below, share it with someone who needs a reminder that goodness still exists, and subscribe to Whispering Tales Stories if you believe in kindness and second chances, because this story is only just beginning. The old woman, who introduced herself simply as Constance, spent nearly an hour on that bench with Nora, the two of them talking as though they had known each other for years. Constance explained, in a voice frail but proud, that she had once been a school teacher, that she had raised a son entirely on her own after her husband passed, working double shifts and mending clothes at night to keep him fed and educated. She spoke of him with a tenderness that made Nora's chest ache, though she said little about where he was now or what he did, only that they hadn't seen each other in months because he traveled constantly for work. Nora, without knowing anything about who Constance truly was, insisted on walking her home, carrying her basket the entire way through winding streets lined with modest houses. When they reached a small, unassuming cottage at the edge of town, Constance invited her in for tea, and Nora, seeing the loneliness etched into the old woman's face, could not bring herself to refuse. They sat together in a kitchen that smelled of cinnamon and old wood, and Nora listened patiently as Constance recounted stories from her years of teaching, her laughter returning slowly, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a storm. From that day forward, Nora began visiting Constance every few days, sometimes bringing bread from the bakery where she worked long, exhausting shifts, sometimes simply sitting with her in comfortable silence. She never asked for anything in return, and she certainly never suspected that the son Constance spoke of so lovingly was Julian Ashworth, one of the wealthiest businessmen in the country, a man whose name appeared in financial newspapers and whose company employed thousands across the region. Constance had never wanted her son's success to change how people treated her, and so she lived modestly, quietly, apart from the spotlight that followed him, visiting the market like any ordinary woman. Weeks passed, and Nora's life continued much as it always had, filled with early mornings at the bakery, tired evenings, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had a friend in Constance. She never expected anything to come of her kindness, because that had never been the reason she offered it in the first place. But one afternoon, as Nora arrived at the cottage carrying a small basket of pastries, she found an unfamiliar car parked outside, sleek and imposing, and her heart skipped with a flicker of worry that something might be wrong with Constance. She hurried inside to find Constance sitting at the kitchen table, radiant with joy, her hand clasped tightly around that of a tall, composed man in a tailored coat, whose eyes bore the same warmth as hers. Constance introduced him simply as her son, and Nora, still catching her breath, greeted him politely, unaware of the weight his name carried in the world beyond that small kitchen. It was only when Constance began recounting, with tears in her eyes, the day at the market when a stranger had defended her dignity and walked her home without asking for a single thing in return, that Julian's expression shifted into something quiet and deeply moved. He rose from his chair and thanked Nora personally, his voice thick with emotion as he explained that in a world full of people chasing his attention for his wealth, she was the first person in years who had shown genuine kindness to his mother without knowing anything about him at all. Nora, embarrassed and unsure of what to say, insisted that she had done nothing extraordinary, that anyone with a heart would have done the same. But Julian shook his head slowly, telling her that extraordinary kindness often disguises itself as something ordinary, and that people rarely recognize its value until it touches their own lives. In the months that followed, Julian made sure that Nora's quiet goodness did not go unrewarded, not out of obligation but out of genuine gratitude. He helped her secure a stable position managing community outreach for one of his company's charitable foundations, work that allowed her to help others the way she had once helped his mother, without the exhaustion of scraping by on market coins. Constance, meanwhile, welcomed Nora into her life as though she were the daughter she never had, teaching her, listening to her, and reminding her that compassion always finds its way back to those who give it freely. If this story touched your heart even a little, please consider liking this video and sharing it with someone who needs to be reminded that kindness always matters. And let us know in the comments if you believe that good things eventually find their way back to good people. And before we close this story, if you feel it in your heart, type the word grace in the comments below, as a small reminder to yourself and to everyone watching that grace and kindness can transform even the darkest of days. Nora never set out to change her life that morning in the market. She only wanted to defend a stranger's dignity, yet in choosing kindness over indifference, she discovered a friendship, a purpose, and a quiet joy she never knew she was searching for. Sometimes the smallest acts of compassion carry the power to alter the course of an entire life, proving that even in a world hardened by judgment, gentleness still has the final word.